Nyandev, has Alag Saab joined?
Not yet, sir. Not yet.
Can you call him?
Okay. So his number I don't have, sir. Sir.
1 minute, I'm doing.
Please. Correct.
Sir, are you joining?
I pressed on that link and Zoom says it is not working.
1 minute, sir. 1 minute. Nyandev.
Yes, yes.
He says he pressed on the link, but the Zoom says it is not working.
You got it, madam? Zoom says that it is not working. The speaker has pressed up the link.
And he's been doing it from 2:30, he says.
Oh, he's been doing it from 2:30.
Anyway, his number,
Okay.
Nyandev, please write down. Nyandev?
Yes, sir.
Please write down, his number is 93270.
1
minute. 93270.
Yes.
59552.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll send him immediately the link. Once again.
He might, I'll tell you what might be happening, Nyandev.
Yes, sir.
He may have pressed the button for launch meeting.
Yeah.
Which is the host button.
Yes, sir. Nyandev will be speaking to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Sir, they are all trying to get in touch with you. They will, sir. If you close the phone, they are ringing you up. Yeah.
Actually,
Nyandev, any luck? Nyandev, you are muted.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What
There is there it is raining heavily, but I have sent him the link twice. Again, I am sending him by email also.
Oh God.
Yeah. Somehow,
No, I have also sent him. That is not the issue.
yeah. What is happening when he clicks the link? It is not responding. When he clicks
But
the link,
I only wonder, Nyandev, is he clicking on launch meeting?
oh,
Because if he's clicking on launch meeting, then he is doing something which the host has to do.
yeah. Sir, clicking on launch meeting वर करत असतील का सर एखाद्या वेळेस? Huh? So, okay, I'll phone him again and tell him. Huh. No, I'll phone and tell him, sir. Huh?
We'll have to take a call on this.
Ale, sir, he is there. Yes, sir.
He's there. Ah,
Yeah,
good.
yeah. God, thank
Well,
God, yeah. Thank God. So
He's arrived.
Yeah,
Alex
yeah.
Saab,
माझं कुठे?
has he been unmuted?
He
Alex
is
Saab? Yeah.
अलग सरांना अनम्यूट आहेत ना अलग सर केलं. He
He's
is
connecting
unmuted.
to audio. 1 minute.
Yeah.
He's connecting to audio.
Yeah. माईक ऑन नाहीये त्यांचा. Is
Just Nyandev, just
Yes,
speak
yes.
to him to connect the mic. Alex Saab, can you
अलग
hear us?
सर. अलग सर. अलग sir.
He's muted.
He's muted.
Let the host unmute him. Nyandev?
Yes. Ask to unmute. Unmute.
Yeah,
Can you hear us, Alex Saab?
I can hear you. Can
Yes,
you
Oh,
hear me?
excellent.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Please start.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
good. Then we can start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a minute of bit of a welcome and introduction of the lecture series. Vishisa. Good afternoon, everybody. And at the outset, I am very grateful to welcome our guest of honor today, Professor Y.K. Alak, for accepting our invitation. Now I join my honorable Vice Chancellor and Professor D.T. Shirke and Dr. Y.S.P. Thorat in welcoming Professor Alak, a renowned economist of the world repute and policymaker of early generation of the independent India. This is the third lecture today. And Alak sir, as you said that you do not want to waste the time of my Vice Chancellor because he is not an economist. But kindly allow me to reveal it to you that though he does not belong to the discipline of economics, but has an immense interest in economics because he belongs to statistics, one of the closest houses, closest neighboring houses of economics. And therefore he has decided to chair this session, and he has been present for our earlier lectures of this lecture series also. Our Pro-Vice Chancellor is also there with us, again a non-economist, but bit farther to economics when compared to statistics. but not a stranger altogether to economics. A professor of physics is also present for this lecture, and therefore I welcome Dr. P.S. Patil. There are students, teachers of economics, those who have joined this lecture because they have I know they have the interest in Professor Alagh Saab, and therefore the audience belongs to the entire country, every corner of the country. I welcome to them also. Now I request because I'm cutting short this introduction with my apologies of bit of technical inconvenience caused to our guest of honor. Now I request our adjunct professor Dr. Y.S.P. Thorat to please welcome and introduce Professor Y.K. Alagh, a close friend of Professor Thorat. Thorat sir, please, over to you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Respected Dr. Alagh, guest of honor and speaker for this afternoon. Dr. D.T. Shirke, Honorable Vice Chancellor and Session Chair. Dr. P.S. Patil, Pro Vice Chancellor. Dr. Jnandev Talole, Head Department of Economics, Shivaji University. Distinguished members of faculty, researchers, students, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third invited lecture organized by the Department of Economics. Usually, such lecture series are somewhat technical and subject specific. While conceptualizing the present set of lectures, the overwhelming thought in my mind was that for too long, economics has been presented as a technical subject for a narrow audience, consisting of graphs, equations, and mathematical models. I believe, and I sincerely believe, that in its philosophic aspect, economics is about life. I also believe that at its frontier, economics intersects with all subjects: psychology, history, geography, mathematics, logic, you name it. These lecture series, conceived jointly by the Vice Chancellor, the Head of Department Economics, members of the faculty, and myself, is a small effort at humanizing the subject and extending its outreach. We hope that it meets with your blessings and your approval. It is customary to introduce the speaker, and I have been asked to do this. The underlying idea in doing so is to provide the audience an insight into the achievements and personality of the speaker. But the truth of the matter is that while the speaker's achievements are usually meticulously reported, his or her personality remains hidden. Taking cognizance of this, I propose first to recount very, very briefly the speaker's considerable achievements, and then tell you a story about him, which not only illustrates what kind of a person he is, but also raises certain issues concerning the rationale of university education. Dr. Yogendra Alagh is first and foremost an academic, holding a doctoral degree in economics from the University of Pennsylvania, and presently Professor Emeritus and Vice Chairman of the Sardar Patel Institute of Economic and Social Research at Ahmedabad. In 1994, he was a distinguished Fulbright lecturer in the United States, and in 2000, the Shastri Lecturer in Canada. He has taught economics at the Indian Institute of Management and, among others, at the universities of Rajasthan and Pennsylvania. Importantly, he was Vice Chancellor of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, one of India's foremost educational institutions, and was awarded the V.K.R.V. Rao Award in Economics in 1981. That's one facet to Dr. Alag's personality. Second, Dr. Alag has been a distinguished national and international civil servant, having been a member of the Planning Commission, Chairman, Bureau of Industrial Costs and Prices, Secretary to the Government of India, Special Advisor to the United Nations, and consultant to the Food and Agriculture Organization, the ILO, the World Bank, and the UNDP. Contra-intuitively, he is also a fine example of a professional making good in the political space, having been minister at the center of power and for planning and program implementation, with additional charge of Ministry of Science and Technology. His talents have been recognized not only by the government, but also by the corporate sector. And he has served as an independent director on a number of corporate boards, including the Tatas, where he and I were both co-directors for a very long time. Finally, Dr. Alag is an author of note and has published extensively at home and abroad. His books on agriculture and economy have been well received. His columns in the Indian Express and Business Line, which appear from time to time, are a pleasure to read. So much for Dr. Alag's achievements. But what of the man? What sort of a man is he who is going to speak to you today? In order to acquaint you with what sort of a person he is, let me tell you a story which relates to the period when he was Vice Chancellor of the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Universities, as you know, receive grants and funds. Now, in regard to a certain funding scheduled to be received by the JNU, many years ago, the students were of the view that acceptance of that grant would seriously compromise the independence of the university. This was their view. This view was supported and upheld by the Students' Union, which gave a call for agitation and dharna. In the wake of this development, the Vice Chancellor called a meeting of his principal officers, the deans, and sought their advice. There was a great deal of discussion, but the final counsel was call the police. After pondering over the matter, the Vice Chancellor told his colleagues that accepting their advice meant, in effect, that the local superintendent of police would thereafter be the Vice Chancellor of the JNU and not him. He explained to them that so long as he was in the chair, he would like to function as the VC, both de jure and de facto, both in law and in reality. This being the case, he regretted his inability to accept their advice. The deans raised a counterpoint. Not calling the police was okay, but how did the Vice Chancellor propose to tackle the student unrest and the dharna without police assistance? And what did the Vice Chancellor propose to do if the agitation escalated into a law and order problem? Who would be responsible? The Vice Chancellor, who was young at the time, thought for a long while and then quietly announced what he proposed to do. He told his officers that in protest against what he considered to be unreasonable demands of the students, he proposed to go on a hunger strike, sitting right in front of them. He also informed the registrar of the JNU and the chancellor of the university of his proposed course of action and requested that no salary be paid to him for the days he remained on hunger strike. The hunger strike by the students and the counter-hunger strike began. It was a battle of wills which was to continue for 4 long days, till at last the students relented. The university carried the day. Now don't misunderstand me. I have not recounted this story to praise Dr. Alagh, because both he and I are well past the age of praise and flattery. I have recounted this incident to raise an issue as to what is the rationale for a university and the philosophic basis of university education. Today, many universities are politicized at the students' level. Some more, some less. Some in good ways, some in not so good ways. Shivaji University is somewhat insulated and peaceful from this standpoint. That is a fact. But whether it is a good thing or not, I'm not sure. Having been a student leader and an activist in my student days, I feel that in addition to being temples of learning, universities are and should also be the training ground for students to understand the fundamentals of citizenship and the rules for matured, value-based political conduct. In the story that I recounted, we saw how, when a relatively young vice chancellor was confronted by a potential law and order situation, he chose not to call the police, but acted outside the box. In doing so, he achieved 3 things. He preserved the autonomy of the university and its respect. He upheld the status of the vice chancellor. And above all, he successfully taught young students a lesson in practical political conduct, many of whom remember it to this day. Today, perhaps in this audience itself, there are many who advocate that during their university careers, students should confine themselves to the classroom and should be passive recipients of standardized education, thus raising the most fundamental of all questions. What should a university stand for? I cannot find better lines than the following, penned by Free India's first Prime Minister, who said, and I quote, "A university stands for humanism, for tolerance, for reason, for the adventure of ideas, and for the search of truth. A university must always stand for the onward march of the human race towards ever higher objectives. If our universities can discharge this duty adequately, then I have no doubt that all will be well with the nation and with the people of India." Taking this as a guiding light, we need to ask ourselves today how universities, and in particular our university, can go beyond its traditional role and take on the additional responsibility of molding citizens There are no easy answers, but we need to debate. We need to ask at the highest level as to whether the environment in a university should be restrictive or should it be liberal? Should it tolerate all castes, creeds, and faiths? Or should it be narrow? Should it treat students as children to be disciplined or as adults to be listened to with respect? Should the younger generation be permitted within reasonable limits to examine new ideas and new ideologies? And should they be encouraged to think in different and even controversial ways? Or should students be imprisoned within age-old frameworks of thinking and acting? Dr. Alag's example shows that if an ordinary person, a very ordinary person, stands and acts by his conscience, he can or she can generate an extraordinary energy. His conduct shows that vice chancellors are no ordinary posts. His action shows that vice chancellors can become extraordinary leaders because they have the potential within them to be change agents whose multiplier influence in society and on the nation can only be described as incalculable. With a view, therefore, to listen to such a man, I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, the speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Yogendra Alag. Dr. Alag, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Alag sir. Alag sir, can you hear me?
Dr. Alag is mute.
No.
Doctor, Alag Saab, can you unmute?
Sir, unmute yourself. Alag sir.
Unmuted.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We are waiting for your lecture, sir.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Uh,
Please go ahead.
Yeah, Honorable Vice Chancellor Patil, chair of this occasion, my friend Dr. Yashwant Thorat, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Honorable Dean, Professor Talule, my student friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege to give a lecture, an invited lecture, to the Department of Economics at the Shivaji University at Kolhapur. I have an old connection with Kolhapur and with the university. When Sakal celebrated its 50th year, I was invited to Kolhapur. And the university, and my lecture was in the university, and of course, in one of the lecture theaters in the city. And we had much dancing and merriment, and above all, great Marathi food, Marathi chicken, and all the rest of it, which I enjoyed. And I'm missing it because this is a virtual meeting and you can't eat Marathi chicken virtually. But I hope that the days will not be far off when 82 years young, I will go physically to Kolhapur and give another lecture. It's a great privilege to give this lecture, and I'm glad that many of the non-economists have been kind to attend an initial function and to have left. But before that, many great thanks to my friend Dr. Yashwant Thorat. It's customary to say that he has not responsible for what he has said. But I must say that, to be honest with you, that the way he spins a story was something that I really enjoyed, and I hope you enjoyed it too. He's a great raconteur, and that was a great thing. For the rest of it, of course, he gave himself away when he said that he and me have worked together on many occasions and for many things. And that, of course, is responsible for all the great things that he said of me. I will speak on not on economic policy. So I'm glad that those people who are interested in economic policy have left. I will speak on economic theory. I'm not interested in each one of you agreeing to what I think is important. What I'm interested in is that you should have the skills such that when the country bowls googlies on you, you have the batting consciousness and skill to be able to take it on, to understand what is the reality behind what is being thrown at you, and then to make your own judgment on those issues. And for these reasons, I've selected a few economic problems: elections and industrial policy, origin of reform, how does economic reform take place, related issues, where are we now in globalization, what are the big environmental issues that we are facing. I just read recently a Hungarian economist who joined Harvard, and his PhD thesis before he had come to America, he was a mathematician, was on the laws of entropy. And the laws of entropy worry about a context where you have so badly handled it that there's no going back. It's something like what we call pralay. I think the real challenge for my country is that the pandemic and those who would misuse its resources, from the forests of Himalaya, the ghats, and the water as you go into the Deccan Plateau, that they learn not to do it, that we are able to stop them with democratic methods of not doing it. And I think if you develop the skills with which to do that, I will be a very happy camper. So I'm going to talk about elections and industrial policy. As Ken Galbraith said, elections are the liberal hour. What did he mean by that? What he meant by that was that it is a time at which anything goes. Sab chalta hai. I can promise you, if I'm standing as a MP or an MLA or in local politics, I can promise you all the goodies of life without telling you what the costs are. That is not a good thing. But if you look into it a little bit more, in a way, that propaganda sets the agenda, because then you can hold people to task for that. Because, अरे भाई, you promised this, अब क्या हुआ? Now, he or she will not give you everything in power, but at least she will be forced or he will be forced to do whatever little they can. And we should be grateful for that, because we are a poor country and not everything is available on the state domain, and we still have to work. Our generation, don't believe the guys who tell you कि अच्छे दिन आ गए हैं. अच्छे दिन तो आएंगे जरूर. इतने अच्छे देश में इतने अच्छे लोगों के लिए तो अच्छे दिन आएंगे. लेकिन मैं ये मानता हूं that at least this generation will have to sacrifice so that the future in the middle of the century will be bright for its children and grandchildren. So while in elections we promise everything, but actually first the UPA government and then the NPA government, we have actually had a pretty bad economic performance now for many years. And nobody tells us that that's not because of so-called reform being there, but the prerequisites of reform, which are sacrificed, are not there. So in fact, the gross savings rate, which had reached around 30%, and in the plan that the UPA government had then produced, the 12th plan, it was supposed to go up to 32. In fact, it went down to 30. And later on, it went down to 28. Now, instead of saying that this is a part of the agenda, first the UPA, then the NPA, somebody as distinguished as the chairman of the Economic Advisory Council of the UPA didn't refer to that. He said if we have reform, the economy will benefit. And he very sagely, because he's a very distinguished economist, gave lectures on the sources of growth. But what he didn't say was that the investment rate had gone down from 30 to 28. And unless the gross savings rate rises, it will not rise. So it went on. The next government also repeated the same thing. I would like the people who are in this lecture to understand that there are no goodies in economics. There is nothing which you get. Economics is a matter of choice. To crowd in private investment, you need public investment. If you don't invest in infrastructure, then just talking about reform will not get you anywhere. So every time there are elections, the local body, the Kolhapur Chamber of Commerce and others, they will be promised tax incentives. They will be promised reservations. They will be promised preferential market access. They will be promised that the taxes which are there on the local thing in my state on gems and jewelry, the GST will be reduced. Well, it never happens. And the finance minister can make special appearances for ceramics or textiles or gems, also important in Kolhapur, or gold or sugar or whatever. But You see, the GST, its economic logic requires fewer rates. And those people who offer you more rates are, in a sense, cheating you. They are not being reformed. I think for a student of economics, the more important thing is I can see three issues. Go back and see what were the issues in discussion before the election. A tax concession, a tariff change, a subsidy has economic issues behind it. And if they were there, then we're pretty sure that they'll be there now. Second, appreciate that in a poor country, there is a real resource constraint. And so all the promises that they are making you will go away on account of the political compulsions of the real constraint. And then there is a macro policy issue. Any concession at the macro level will mean that if there is a real constraint, then something else will have to go give. If more is to be given over one sector or one policy. And so go back and read, go to the library and read Tinbergen's theory of economic policy. There has to be consistency. The first Nobel Prize winner said between objectives that you take and the instruments that you have. And do that. I enjoyed that. It's not there, then the equation can't be solved. So Tinbergen and then analyze the issues that are thrown at you. Reform. What is the origin of reform? Nobody goes into that. Because you see, they are interested in taking credit themselves. So what they do is reform. What the earlier fellows were doing is a lot of focus, focus. But if you're a student of the Indian economy, then the stagnation of the 60s was followed by a global acceptance of the fact that the 80s of the last century saw a break with the stagnation of the 60s. So the stagnation theories were reversed. Ishar Ahluwalia was a major author of the stagnation hypothesis. She accepted that in the 80s. Arvind Panagria was actually the first to say in his classic work on Hindu versus Reform, he set at rest the characterization of the 80s by somebody like Meghnad Desai, saying that these were just Gundaraj. In contrast, he said to the isolated and ad hoc policy measures to release immediate pressures prior to the 80s taken as a whole constituted significant change and an activist program. He said by 1990, approximately 20% of the tariff lines and 30% of imports had come under OGL. Import licensing on many other products was eased up. So my request to you is to go and read Lal, to go and read Panagria. I'm not asking you to read my books because that would be doing self-advertisement. Go and read Vijay Joshi, who said that the 80s was the highest ever. I have deliberately not given you the exact reference of these things in my printed lecture because I want you to go to the Kolhapur University Library or the departmental library and hunt these out yourself. I can tell you that as a student, what I learned by hunting books in the University of Rajasthan Library and the Charles Van Pelt Library in the University of Pennsylvania, I never learned from anything else. So do that. I'm giving you the references. When you have time, I'm not saying that you should take away time from giving a good party to your girlfriend, but when you have time from that, do spend time in the library. That is the place where you will learn a lot, and that is the place to which you will go back again and again in life when you face problems, which I'm sure you will, and which you are destined to solve. So the origin of reform is there, and of course, what they said was that there was a lot of sovereign borrowing in the 80s. Now, as my friend Urjit Patel, who was governor of the Reserve Bank, and for some obvious reasons fell out of favor and therefore resigned, has said that if you maintain a very high interest rate, which is what we did, I mean, when the labor was 2 or 3%, our real interest rates were 5%. Then everybody and their uncle is happy to invest in your country. So you were getting FDI not because of reform, not because the Indians are patriotic, but they were simply not getting the bond values that we were giving them. So they invested in India. And that is the origin of the big FDIs of the period. Then there is another issue. For some reason, all reform agendas, earlier there used to be plans, now there is the economic survey, the Niti Aayog, they say that what is happening, that is the present restrictions are permanent and not transitory. Now, actually, this is not true. Every 6 months you say that. Instead of coming to grips with the problem, that you have to face the problem now. So at the time of the budget, you always give a very high projection of revenue based on last year's budget estimate. But actually somewhere near November, because you have not raised resources, the revised estimates are much lower. And then the real struggle starts because everybody knows that there were real resources. So people lobby for it. Now, this is a game that's been going on. Urjit Patel understand it. But for some reason, the reform doesn't take place. It reminds me of the kind of poverty debate that goes on. You might recall that Professor Thorat was kind enough to mention that I was in the Planning Commission. My first job was as advisor for prospective planning. And I was asked to chair a task force on poverty. And I did a fairly detailed job. I connected all the data from the NSS, broke it up into those people who are below a cutoff point and above a cutoff point, their consumption. And from that, I worked back to a poverty cutoff line. I also laid down what I called a modified poverty line. I said, if the political economy can't solve the poverty problem, at least we can alleviate it by helping those who are really at the bottom end of the pole. And then I said, listen, this is a line which must change. The famous Marxist economist Eric Hobsbawm has in a classic book explained, Thorat Saab must have read him, Cambridge man, that every century and every age has its own definition of what is a good life. And that is the norm. And that norm keeps on changing. Hobsbawm came for a lecture and I met him in the ISI, Kolkata. And he said, I'm so glad, Yoginder, that your report understands this. But somehow or the other, they never changed the poverty line and never developed a new line. I kept on saying, नहीं भाई अब तो 80s में ये तो सब खत्म हो गया. We are no longer living from hand to mouth. We have now grain exports. Now we can be more ambitious. And anyway, with agroclimatic planning, we have more resources to solve the hunger problem. But you know, they didn't change it. They set up task forces, the Lakdawala line. And what it did finally was to update. I set up the Lakdawala poverty group when I was member planning commission. Then the government fell, so I went back to my research institute. Lakdawala Sahab kept on telling me, Alag, you must come and give us guidance. I said, sir, no, I can't because I've set up the group and it would be wrong of me to interfere. But you know, Lakdawala died and the group only updated the prices. And then later on, the same thing was done by Tendulkar. I asked Suresh, I said, Suresh, why did you do that? We had set up the Tendulkar. He said, Yoginder, he actually did something which is much worse. He said that the urban poverty line will also be the national poverty line. So it wasn't the rural poverty line. So I said, Suresh, why did you do this? We wanted to really define the poverty line again. He said, Yoginder, some continuity with the past is important. So it goes on. Now, this is not the way things should happen. You must always question these policies. And, you know, you must change. You reform. We said we will move away from multiple tariff rates. Why haven't we done it? We must ask. We said that we will move over to a GST. That was Vijay Kelkar. Why hasn't this happened? Why are there 5 rates? One of my students has in the PhD thesis worked out that if you have more than 4 rates of GST, then your tax structure is more or less what it was with the sales tax. So what kind of a reform is that? So, young friends, I want you to do that. And as far as the big debates are concerned, now it is not customary to decry India. But you must remember that when I was young, India was a basket case. So when we were saying, Nani, bhai, we have turned around, they were saying, Nani, bhai, how can you turn around? And then Robert Wade wrote a famous paper in World Politics in East Asia's economic success. And he said East Asia was not a case of the World Bank reform. It was a case of what the Indians called reform, which is measured reform, slow reform. And he put in a footnote, a reference to a paper that I had written in the Asian Economic Review, in which I said that we reformed slowly because we didn't want to go back, and we never went back. And we acknowledged that the famous American economist of Indian origin, works in South Asia, told him that the guy who did this was Yogendra Alag. But you know, that argument for the strategic trade literature, it became a part of the global literature on strategic trade policy. And John Stopford at the Carnegie Institute of Mellon, Carnegie Mellon Institute at Pittsburgh, talks about India and Poland as the few cases of systematic reform. Of course, he puts one of my friends, Lance Taylor. Now, why is it that reform talk comes after there is a crisis? There is a global crisis, वहां होता है, हमारे वहां रिफॉर्म की बात. Why does it happen? One of the great pieces on that is by Stiglitz. And I would recommend that you please read Stiglitz. And he really discusses this issue, that why is it that reform comes after? It's not because of economic theory. It's because the guys who are in trouble, they want you to play ball for them. The Indonesian rupiah, my friend Iwan Aziz, who's professor at Cornell and also visiting professor at the University of Indonesia, had crashed. You know, this is an economy which is growing at 20% per annum. Thailand. And all of a sudden, they lose 3/4 of their wealth. और वो जो लोग थे जो उनको रिफॉर्म की बात करते थे, जिन्होंने, the guys who pushed them. I was asked to go to Indonesia after this, together with the Japanese economists. And we told them that you had made a mistake. And, you know, I remember that old man Suharto, when he learned that I was there on a UN mission, he told the Indian ambassador, ask the Indian to come and see me. So I went there, you know, hot afternoon. And he turned to me and he said, give them all the advice that you want. My finance minister will deal with it. Dr. Alag, I appeal to you as a fellow Asian. My people must get rice. It was like Mrs. Gandhi telling me, देखो जो करना है करो, लेकिन मेरे लोगों को खाना चाहिए, which was the origin of the first agricultural submodel of the fifth plan, what we call the Advanced Irrigation Benefit Program. कि मैंने देखा कि जहाँ irrigation है, वहाँ पानी, वहाँ growth high है, जहाँ नहीं है, वहाँ नहीं है, और जहाँ मुश्किलें हैं, as in the Deccan Plateau, unless we give money for proper use of groundwater, life will not be good. So we solved that problem. This old man wanted that. I told him, Excellency, I come from a country where grain is important. I'm trying my best. And you know, 2 months after that, he was overthrown. And the grain bazaars of Jakarta and Bali were looted. Because when you are that hungry, you are willing to face bullets rather than die of that hunger. And they were all remembering Sukarno because Sukarno gave them rice. And Suharto had removed Sukarno, but he knew that. And Bankarno was back again in the regimes that are there since then. So reform takes place when there is a crisis in the first world. There is no second world now after the fall of the Soviet Union. And this was, I was once in the UNESCO board, which Dr. Thorat has been kind enough to refer to. And Richard Recupero wrote a very famous piece on this. And then I was asked to work through Indian reform in that context. So why does reform take place, as Recupero said, after the East Asian meltdown? This is a phenomena which you need to study. I think it is a manifestation of power and global supremacy. And my friends, not just an understanding of the Cobb-Douglas production function. You must understand the Cobb-Douglas production function. If you don't do it, and I am on your examining board, I will fail you. If I am interviewing you, you will not get your job. But I'm a student of the Nobel laureate Lawrence Klein, who was a part of what is called the Cowles Commission. I would recommend that you read Jaling Koopmans and understand that reform, that economic theory has to be put on its head. I asked Sukumar Chakravarti this question. You are one of the greatest theorists of the decade. Why is your monetary policy so reactionary? He looked at me and his eyebrows furrowed. And I could see he was angry. When he was angry, his eyebrows were furrowed. He said, Joginder, those people who don't understand arithmetic and the budget constraint will never help the poor. They will only transfer inflation to them. So that is what Klein taught me. That you make economic theory, he told me, Yoginder, make it, if necessary, stand on its head. Because you are destined to solve problems. I have had the good fortune of training you. You are one of my best students. And you have said that, please, I can't stay back anymore because I have to go back home. I will lose my job. And we are making your job secure. But please remember that we have taught you tools. We don't know the answers to those problems. You will solve them as you go along. And if you need our help, you will call us for that. So that is the lesson. Read the Cowles Commission. Must read your theory. Otherwise, the Alags and their chelas will fail you. But when you face a problem, damn it, pardon me, don't use profanity. भाई उसको वो नहीं है, उस समस्या को सुलझाओगे कैसे? When I was at Kolhapur, there was a farmer who called me and he explained to me how he had developed certain organic bajra. That is very important. If there is any way in which I can help him, I should help him. What is not important is that I have the VKR award. That is kind. I mean, K.N. Raj said once, there is a big politics behind the Nobel Prize, so we will create a Nobel Prize in India. We will call it the VKR Award. And he and my friend Dandekar and Professor C.R. Rao chose me and Professor Sen, the Dean of International Studies in GNU, as the first VKR prize, and which is a great distinction, I regard it. But the point is not that. The point is, can you solve problems? And in doing so, will you bring those issues there? In my written speech, I have written a lot about the economics behind policy reform, and I don't think I have a board to describe all this. I think one thing I will describe, we wanted to reform in a way such that we don't go to the Latin American path where countries lost 2/3 of their output because of reform. There is, as UNICEF said, a lost generation because children grew up in a stunted manner. We wanted to phase reform. I think I was the guy who coined this, the theory of not hastening slowly. The theory of hastening slowly. And that was, I will develop what is an efficiency price. I called it the long range marginal cost price. I will develop it from the companies that Yashwant Thorat chairs because they're the best companies. I'll take their cost of production. If not, I will develop it through experiments and through technology and pricing. And I will tell my companies, come on, man, I will give you 90% protection for 3 years. If you can shape up, I'm going to reduce this to 50%, 40%, and then 10%. If you shape up, you'll survive. If not, you will go the way of all flesh, which is the way it should be. And I am proud of that reform because the best companies survived. And in fact, that was a period of high growth because the new ones, then their wings spread. Yashwant was acquiring soda ash in North America. And so it went on. In Morocco, the Indian flag was there. But you kids will be there. Always march as a proud Indian and go by the rules your grandmother taught you. Don't be dishonest. Be honest. Do your best. And then remember that you have a culture which says, as we say in Punjabi, chhado bhai, jo hoga so hoga. I tried my best. I will always be there to stand by you. 20 years from now, you will be in positions of power. I will still be there because I will only be 100 years old. And I plan to live long. And I hope to say, that's good. Do it more. Because we are destined to be the greatest country of the world. And we will be if we don't listen to the Sahukars. Those who say that the good life has come today. No, there is still the need for sacrifice. Another generation will have to sacrifice itself. The girl child must go to school. Not just the good girl child, the Adivasis girl, the scheduled caste girl. By then, when the Indian rocket goes up, this time when NASA sent it to Mars, it was an American of Indian origin. In 2050, she will be an Indian of Indian origin. That is my dream. And it is you who will fulfill that dream. We have to be the greatest country of the world. A very great leader of this country once asked me, चीन और हमारे में कौन जीतेगा? Because I at first told him that the only future race is between China and India, and the rest will fall by the side. The Americans, the Europeans, and others. Because we have the population, and now we have the technology with which we. So I told him, वो जीतेगा जो करेगा, वो जीतेगा जो रिफॉर्म करेगा, और रिफॉर्म का मतलब है ट्रेड, और ट्रेड का मतलब है कॉम्पिटिटिवनेस, और उसका मतलब है सैक्रिफाइस. वो जीतेगा जो अपनी जनता को इन्वॉल्व करेगा. 1/10 of this population or so belongs to minorities. They are each 10 to 12 to 13%. Half of it is women. Half of it is SCs and OBCs. This country will not reach to the sky if they are left behind. People like me, the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins, we have just been exploiting the world for centuries. As the great French anthropologist Louis Dumont said, Homo hierarchicus. Go get his book in translation. The only society, I am ashamed to admit, which was able to ingrain in its people that its right is to be exploited. Damn it! No, again, please, Yashwant, forgive the abuse. Dash it, we have to change that. Otherwise, we will never have the destiny that the world has kept for us. And that destiny belongs to these young people. Finally, sustainability issues. And now I'm really running out of time, so I won't get into the details. I will just repeat it and then you can ask me questions. See, many things are, and can't do them because there is some short-term economic problem of some tax or something. Those can be solved. But at the larger level, there are 6 issues. There must be a short-run strategy of development and a long-term strategy in which externalities and interrelationships are not so sight of. This is particularly for sectors and regions. I think it's most certainly true for regions like the one in which Kolhapur is there in the agroclimatic regionalization and the products that it produces. These are potentials for development, but this would require selective and intense analysis of recent developments, problematics, and evolving potential in a fast-changing economy. There are no permanent answers to these industries when you go to the Kolhapur Chamber of Commerce. You can only tell them, these are the techniques. If you give me a case, I will solve the problem. But the more important thing is you learn how to solve it yourself. Then these policies have to be a part of a development strategy, strategic interventions in existing markets, introduce sustainability concerns or evolve new market forms in backward areas, fragile lands. There might be the whole question of appropriate factor prices, the cost of non-renewable resources, for example, or product prices. Interventions can be subsidies, taxes, information systems, training, development of new forms, farmer-managed cooperatives, and so on. And there must be a policy base for growth in areas like the Deccan Plateau, fragile resource bases, land and water development. These can be areas of low water availability, poor soils, special areas like the Ghats and cold and hot deserts, coastal islands, and so on. Then special problems arising out of misdirected industrial growth. So the whole question of waste disposal and social costs of industrialization and urbanization. Then the problem that I discussed, the relationship between population growth and carrying capacity, and how to develop institutions to manage that. And finally, techniques in which you can relate with the larger plans in the globe, climate change, sustainability. That you're not a Trumpland man, you are an Obama man or a Biden man. And help, listen, help him not in the sense of Biden ji, हम आपके दोस्त हैं, लेकिन जब climate change की discussion होती है, तो are you with him? Then if you are with him, then you have to pay the price of that at home. Because he is much too clever and he's not going to let you simply get away with the vote. I mean, everybody wants to be friends with India because we're a great trade partner. But when the strategic issues come, they will be seeing what you are doing. And India has to be a strategic power. This whole business of the Taliban and everything, we will overcome all of it. You are the women and men who will do it. And I'm grateful to you for listening to me for so long. It's such a pleasure to be asked to give a lecture. And if in some moments I started using abuse, please forgive me for that. It does not behave an 82-year young Professor Emeritus. Thank you. Jai Hind. I will be willing to answer any questions and look forward to comments.
Yes, sir. After a long time, such a classical kind of lecture, the feast we have been receiving from you, sir. My chat box is full of questions, full of comments, and full of praises. Many people they simply thanked the department for having been given to them a lecture, opportunity of the lecture by you. So, sir, kindly take couple of questions from that chat box. I will be reading them out for you. The first question, because you dwell upon poverty substantially, that does the improper institution of poverty gap is one of the reasons for so much of high poverty despite several flagship programs of poverty elevation. So, sir, please.
Well, you see, poverty removal has to be a part of a general plan. I'm not saying that you can't give a subsidy. I think at the lowest end of the poll, you will have to give subsidies. The widow, you know, the person who's handicapped, what the NSS says, the lowest 3% of the consumption profile. You just have to give them grain to survive. But beyond that, poverty removal is a question of integrating with a plan, a development strategy. And that development strategy depends on each region. There is no one strategy. This was, I mean, these days it's very fashionable to ravish Rajiv Gandhi. But he said, no, not just, he told me, he said, Yogendra, not just multiple irrigation and groundwater. Every region will have a strategy. Go back to that. And I did. And you know, many of the friends who are now there, Deshpande, all know, my
Yes.
he solved the problem of poverty there. That is the answer. He produced from the seeds there nachane, high yielding nachane. He produced from the seeds there a wine. And, you know, so that is the issue. The issue is you plan for the region and poverty gets removed as a part of that. And that has to be a part of a national plan and a global plan. Unfortunately, the government has given up planning. I don't think the corporate sector is able to solve poverty problems in that sense of the term. I may be wrong. If some students can prove me wrong, I am available at yalag@gmail.com. But my own impression is no, that will not happen. Poverty has to be a part of a larger, poverty removal has to be a part of a larger strategy. And you should most certainly throw the Alag poverty report into the waste paper basket.
So there are two more questions. Because I have sorted them out for you. And one of them is very important, that the present government has been continuously asking for the RBI for its surplus. Please dwell upon it.
RBI for it?
The present government has been continuously asking for the RBI for its surplus, to give it surplus.
I think that's very short-sighted, because that is the way we build up reserves. And with this kind of volatility in global systems, we need reserves. And if the RBI itself is always willing to share a part of its profits with the government of India, but beyond that, they shouldn't push them. There is a Bimal Jalan committee. I'm not saying it, it is Bimal who is saying it. He's an economist, a dear friend of mine, but he's very close to the NDA. They should follow his report.
And one last thing, sir. Most often, ever since 1990s, early 1990s, because we had introduced LPG, the economic reforms, we call it. And many people have the problem, and they posted it into a chat box, that does only privatization mean economic reforms? Because most often, I think it seems had happened.
Are they referring to privatization of education or generally privatization?
General privatization, general, in general sense. In general sense.
No, privatization, the best people in this were originally the Yugoslavs and the French. And they prepared assets for privatization. Of course, some assets should not be privatized. See, it's so fashionable to say Indian Airlines ko privatize kar do. Arey bhai, when you had to bring thousands of Indians back from Kabul, would private airlines have done it? Air India did it. Air India has always been there when the Indian has been in trouble. Mature countries need a flag carrier. And that doesn't mean that that flag carrier should not make profits. But if it's, and it can be professionally done, I mean, after all, J.R.D. Tata was the chairman
Right.
of Air India. There's no reason why Ratan Tata can't be the chairman of Air India again. But it has to be working, a flag carrier has to work for the flag. And that is something which is not the private flag, the national flag. So that is my answer to privatization of airlines. Otherwise, privatization simply means that the asset has to be, so those assets where you are terribly short of non-renewable resources, like bauxite, or like, we are short of a mineral that we need for our nuclear program. But making those mines, giving those forests away to the private sector is again a mistake. But leaving that aside, when you privatize, you should prepare the asset. I don't think forests should be privatized. There's no question about that. I've written a book on India's forest policy. But once you privatize an asset, a mining, engineering company, a steel company, or whatever, the important thing is to prepare it for privatization. Make some marginal changes so that it shows that it has profit earning potential. Then to bring in the potential buyers and to have a fair process of bidding. These days, there are so many techniques, reverse bidding and all the rest of it, which can be followed. One of the boys can write a paper on that. I'll be very happy to give it the references. And if you do that, then I think there is something to privatization in the social domain. Otherwise, उठा के company किसी दोस्त को दे दिया, that is not privatization. That is just defrauding the nation.
Yes. And the last question, sir. Recently, it has come into our chat box that whether India is trapped into a political gamble of economic reforms. It is from the perspective of the economics of democracy. That, for example, when the party is out of power, it raises certain issues, and when it comes into the power, it goes for the same issues which it has been resisting earlier. So this is the last question, sir. Whether we are trapped in the gamble of economic reforms.
That we are a democratic country.
Yeah.
And reform has to be a part of democratic processes. I might not like the government in power, but for me to criticize them because they're doing reform is wrong as a professional economist. And as I was explaining in my lecture, and there's a greater detail of that in the printed lecture, when they are outside, they always criticize the government. When they get into the government, they do the same thing. This then means, of course, on some detail, you will always, a professional economist, a professional accountant will always comment on details, which is the way it should be. But generally, we need to support the reform process as professionals. And that means that our reform is slower, but it is sure. Uh, as I said somewhere, I don't remember where now, we never went back on reform. And that creates an element of faith in the Indian system in world markets. Our reform is slow, but once we are there, we don't go back. And CHELSA, where I gave that lecture originally, which is a consulting group from Japan, has published that concept that slow reform is in a way good reform because you don't go back. So I will reserve the right to criticize the budget and any paper that NITI brings out. But I think the fact that our reform is slow is an asset and not a liability.
Yes, sir. I think now it is a time of putting forth you, the chair of this session, a non-economist, a statistician, about whom you said that he should not waste his time for your lecture, but he has been there with us, sir, because he has his own interest in economics. So may I now request our Honorable Vice Chancellor to have his remarks, chair's remarks. So please.
Yeah. Respected speaker and the guest of honor, Honorable Alag sir, respected Dr. YSP Thorat sir, my colleague, and all the faculty and scholars who have joined to this particular platform virtually, almost from more than 10 states across the country. So that itself tells about how excited people are to listen to Dr. Alag sir. Yes, the lecture started with very nice introduction by Dr. Thorat sir, and of course, a story that every academic leader must know, not only know, should understand the true letter and spirit. So I must appreciate for wonderful introduction and making known minute details about today's speaker. When it comes to say something on the address Dr. Alag sir has given, and if I'm not wrong, the questions and the discussion was more centered around the topic poverty. I'm tempted to share a small story, may take about 2 to 3 minutes, which is related to this particular aspect. The story goes like this. Dr. Pandurang Sukhatme, P.V. Sukhatme, was a great statistician, and I come from that domain, so that I reminded of that particular story. Coincidentally, fortunately, Dr. Sukhatme hails from this particular region, Satara district, and he is a PhD from the UK, did his PhD on bipartite graph, you can say, a very theoretical topic, I would say. When we came back to India, was in search of job, and he visited BHU. Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya was the vice chancellor over there, and he was interviewed by vice chancellor. Vice chancellor was very impressed about his academic achievements, and yes, he was academically means very rich, I would say. The question that vice chancellor asked to Dr. Sukhatme, and he said that yes, I do appreciate your academics. You have done a great job. You have acquired a lot of knowledge. But let me know from you in what way you can use your knowledge to remove poverty of poor of this particular country. And that was the question. It was really very, very difficult question to answer for Dr. Sukatme, as he writes in his biography. He says that though I could answer it reasonably, I was not happy with my answer. And what he then did, he spent his entire life to give justice to the question raised by Vice Chancellor. And throughout his life, the next 40 years, more than 40 years, he investigated the methods, philosophy, products, and whatnot, which will help the poor of this particular country.
What a wonderful story.
We
Wonderful
all,
story.
yes, sir. And Honorable Dr. Alak sir has made very important remark.
Honorable VC,
Yes, sir, please.
Honorable VC Sherke sir,
Yes, sir.
Professor Sukatme was responsible for what I call the modified poverty line
Yes,
in
sir.
my
Yes, sir.
first.
Yeah. He fought
He
with
was a
the
member of that committee.
Yeah. He fought with FAO, and FAO was of the opinion that 2/3 of the world is hungry. And he, in fact,
Yeah, and then he said, yes, this meets my criteria. And Dandekar was happy with the poverty line.
Yes,
Because
sir.
both of them, as you remember, used to always fight with each other.
Yes, sir.
But
Yes,
thank
sir.
you,
It
sir,
was-
for your kind
Yes.
words. You
Yeah,
are
yeah.
really a
Very,
great.
I'm
very,
really
very
happy.
good story. Very good story.
Yeah, I'm really happy to listen from you this poverty line and all these things. That I would say to the young researchers is that the topic is still open, and it is an open problem to define a poverty line, because there I could see some of the questions in the chat box that this is the only way, that is the only way. I think these are the questions on which everyone has to think about and should come forward the methodology which will meet the criteria. Sustainable development goals, one of the goals is again poverty, removal of hunger, and everything. But now, when it comes to the country like India, I think we all have to be responsibly address this particular issue very seriously. The second thing which I must admit, and all of us should also admit, is that the way in which you were giving the references and citations, they are really excellent. I think you have given exercise homework to all of us to visit a library, which is a rare thing nowadays. Everyone thinks that everything is on your fingertips. You go and Google it out, you will get. I would say no. The knowledge is still in the library, and library is waiting for the research scholars to visit. And all the references, what you said, you have not intentionally have given the full references, but you have just made just an author name or something of that sort. And I believe the audiences, serious audiences who do visit the library and at least touch some of the books and at least refer the indices of these particular books, that will give, I think, real justice to the speakers. I think I should not say any more than that, but I got a lesson that the lesson about budget, and there is always a revised budget. And I would wait for a day not to revise a budget and implement the budget in the true spirit and give the justice to the citizen of the country. Budget need not all the while limited to and should be discussed with regard to the country. There is a university budget as well. So I do recall the way in which the university budgets are prepared, they are revised and they are implemented. I think the story is very similar, and person like me has to learn so many things from this particular talk. I really admire. And before I close my remarks, I don't have any more remarks. I just to appreciate and pay my respect to you about your wonderful talk. There is a standing invitation to you, sir, to visit Kolhapur, and we are waiting for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir, now it is the time for a customary thing, but I remember my first encounter with you was somewhere about late 90s, way back in late 90s, and reforms were just started, and we met at Pravaranagar at a seminar and with your very close friend, Balasaheb Vikhe Patil. Ramakant Khalab, I think then law minister, was there on the dais with you. Gokhale Institute Director, Professor Vikas Chitre and his faculty. You had presented your paper in a very classical way in an audience. It was farmers, students, teachers, and industry people. You presented in your own stylish way as a classical economist, early generation policy maker of this country immediately after independence. And you were talking about something about the growth rates. Indian economy was growing at the higher or greater rate than the US and all that. And I had posed you a question on the limitations of multiplier and so on and so forth. That was my first encounter with you, sir. We have been reading you ever since our childhood as students of economics. I remember your obituary article in the Indian Express for Borlaug, with whom you worked in the Indian Planning Commission for implementing the Green Revolution in this country. There are several things which one can mention about Professor Alak. I also remember there are several Alak poverty line, Rangarajan, Tendulkar, planning commissions, then planning commissions, Abhijit Sen's poverty line, and so many things. I think, sir, many people do not know that you also had chaired the committee on UPSC reforms, if I am right. So there are so many things. Name the thing and you will find the association of Professor Alak for a long time, for last 50, 60 years in this country, who taught at several institutions, who worked with the government of India for a long time, who contributed to the planning of this country and who contributed to the implementation of Green Revolution, but at heart, a person of disciplined economics, a disciplined econometrician kind of a person at heart and by training. Of course, because you worked under a Nobel laureate, you are a Western learned person. So, sir, and one simple comment I got into my chat box is that thank you, Professor Talule, for having been given Professor Alak after a long time to listen. And I think that summarizes everything about you, your lecture and your style, your study, your references and everything. Now I shall thank my own senior colleague in the department, Dr. Y.S. Pithorat, the adjunct professor in the Department of Economics, for using his contacts with you and having Professor Alak with us in this afternoon today. I will now thank my Honorable Vice Chancellor, who has been there with us for every lecture of this lecture series. Also the Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor of Physics. I need to thank the entire audience of this lecture from across the country. From more than 10 states, the people have joined. I need to thank them from the bottom of my heart. Once again, sir, I am very grateful to you for accepting our invitation and being with us in this afternoon and giving us a lecture of a wise man, a real wise man. So thank you so much for being with us, sir. And we are very grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar.